He's in another meeting.
He's chairing a subcommittee meeting for me right now.
Oh.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. This is the Public Safety Subcommittee of Appropriations, and we're going to hear, I think, from the rest of our agencies that we did not hear from last week, and we are going to hear from Commissioner Owens first.
Sir.
And I guess, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but the things I think that primarily are of interest to us is the jail subsidy, the capacity issue, and probably talk about a little bit in probation. So anyway, if you want to just sort of start.
Yes, sir. I'll be glad to. And I believe you all know Becky East, our Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Corrections. And Chairman, I did plan on doing just that, hitting perhaps 4 highlight areas and using the rest of the time for question and answer session if you think that's appropriate. And I would start, we're on page 35 of the tracking sheet, section 18. And the first item I would call your attention to is, as you said, Chairman, the county jail subsidy, item number 18.2. Item number 18.2 is jail subsidy, and you'll see that we have the same amount this year that we had last year, which is about $9,500 and no additional funds. And I actually think that's kind of a smart way to do this. I brought some slides if the committee would like to see some slides on a little bit of the history of the jail backlog. Becky, if you wouldn't mind passing those out. We're actually in pretty good shape. We've been as high as 4,000 state-sentenced inmates in the county jails as recent as 2 years ago. And we're sitting at about 2,100, 2,106, I think to be exact. This morning it was reported to me, state-sentenced inmates sitting in the county jails waiting to come into the system. Our state system, again, Chairman, if I'm on track, just please indicate if I get off track. Stop me, please. Our state system is at about 107% of capacity currently. The good news is, as you'll see our request coming here a little bit later, in 12 you partially funded, and in 13 we're asking for you to fully fund 2 private prisons coming online. The one in Milledgeville opened up in December of last year and has a capacity of 1,500 beds, and I think we're sitting at about 500 filled so far. When we open up a new facility, we fill them very slowly. We try to put the right inmates in there to begin with. You want to put your more compliant inmates in there. The inmates are going to be running your work details inside and out. So we'll have them fully loaded, we believe, by the end of the fiscal year. So that'll give us another 1,000 beds at that facility. March the 7th, we're going down to Jenkins County and opening up another private prison facility, 1,150 beds there. So that gives us 2,650 additional beds when both facilities are fully occupied. So if you think about the 3 parts of our system, you've got the jail backlog waiting to come in, then you've got your general population within the prison system, and then we have what we call the lockdown beds. We have about 3,000 lockdown beds for when they act up in prison. We've got to have a place to isolate them away from the rest of the inmates. From a large perspective, I think we'll be in very, very good shape throughout the summer and throughout the year. Longer term, looking down the road, both of those private prisons are specifically designed to be expanded to up to 2,500 beds apiece. Should the state need those additional beds at some point, they could bring them online very quickly. So I think a combination of having 2,100 in the jail backlog, commitment stabilizing, 2 new private prisons coming online, no planned additional closures, and then the capacity to ramp both of those prisons up to 2,500 over the long term, I think the state's looking good as well. Should we need additional funds for next fiscal year, which is very possible, we've not seen the criminal justice reform bill, whatever shape it's going to eventually take. I know that through those committee meetings, depending upon what's in the bill and what's passed by this body, there could be significant savings of additional prison beds. So at this point, taking a guess on what our jail backlog may look like for a whole fiscal year next year really is a stab in the dark. So our approach would be, and our request would be, let us just continue to monitor it through the summer, then if additional funds are needed, to request those in the amended budget next year.
Just
matter of curiosity, Commissioner Owens, what does that work out to be as far as you're looking at an average? We pay, what is it, 22
Yes, sir.
per day? And what do you see with this amount of money as being what we'll call an average you're looking at on a year-wide basis?
If you're running a jail backlog of, do the math real quick on top of my head. If you're running a jail backlog of 2,000, that's $44,000 a day times 365. So that's what, about $12.5–13 million. If you could keep it at about 2,000.
You're using low figures. You hope that'll continue on.
We hope, yes, sir. But obviously, as you well know, we
Good
don't
luck.
control the commitments
Yeah.
or the releases, so that makes it difficult.
Good work.
Mr. Chairman, the next item.
Just a second, we got another question.
Yes, sir.
Representative Baker.
The lockdown beds, can you kind of explain that?
Yes, sir.
You said you'll have a capacity of 3,000 lockdown beds. Does that mean you have that many locking down?
Oh, yes, sir.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, sir. I have a population of 57 or so thousand
Right.
in the state prison system. Every prison, if you go in our medium security prisons, by and large, they're open dormitory. They're bays. The inmates are sleeping just like in the military, basic training on bunk beds. And then we'll always have some number of cells, isolation segregation cells, where if an inmate requests protective custody because he feels threatened, we're obligated to put him in a single-man or a two-man cell. Or if we catch an inmate stealing from another inmate or whatever the case may be, we'll lock him or her up as well in a lockdown space. So we're right at capacity. In other words, we're full up in our lockdown space. So we're trying to manage that. That's the challenge moving forward. It's not going to be the additional general population beds. It's managing those 3,000 lockdown beds that we have. And if the system gets much larger, particularly with those higher security inmates, we're going to have to create some more lockdown space at our existing prisons. But that's more of a micro issue within the system. But it is causing us problems right now.
So the lockdown beds are not at one particular facility.
They're spread
They're all
out.
spread out.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, the next item I'd call your attention to, 18.3.9, 18.3.9. It's a small amount of money, but I believe it has potential to have a very, very large impact on our prison admissions. As we talked about earlier, we don't control admissions to the prison system, nor do we control releases. We just have to make our best projections. It's a small amount of money, but what this will allow us to do is to develop an electronic instrument to assess the risk of defendants in the courtroom prior to sentencing.
Let me interrupt you just a second. For the committee members, that's 18.3.12 on ours. You're talking about the risk assessment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just
12 on
wanted,
yours?
ours is 18.3.12.
I apologize. It's
That's-
175,000.
Yeah, go ahead.
What that risk assessment will allow us to do, and this again is a recommendation of the Criminal Justice Reform Council, is allow our DAs and our judges to be more informed at the time of sentencing. And we envision it to be electronic, fairly easy to complete, to give them the risk and needs of that defendant before they sentence to prison. And potentially on down the road through criminal justice reform, we may be able to slice off a few of those lower end offenders who are currently going to prison, perhaps using an actuarial assessment. And we think it'll give our judges and our DAs a better tool to make sentencing decisions. So I think a small investment could have a huge impact on our system years down the road.
Is that risk assessment going to be based on the one that parole uses now for release of prisoners, or is this entirely
It
different?
would be different. I can give you, if the committee would like to,
Sure.
a copy of what we're currently using. It's called the Compass Risk and Needs Assessment. It's a very good tool, but it takes up to 45 minutes to an hour to complete, and we're looking to streamline this tool. And what it does is it tells us what the offender's risks are in the community, his risk to recidivate, his risk of flight, his risk of violence, or her risk of violence, and then also what kind of treatment is associated with those risks, so that as we expand RSAT beds or day report centers, we can better match the offenders with the alternative sentence. That's what we currently use.
All right, so this particular assessment will be available to DAs and to judges in the initial sentencing,
That's the intent, yes, sir.
and will it also be used by probation and maybe potentially early terminations of probation?
Absolutely. On down the stream, it has many, many uses. Absolutely.
Chairman Willard.
Well, I really commend you for this. This is the type of thing that should have been done ages ago. And is it being done as far as administering the test by Well, by whom?
Probation officers, state
Probation officers who are
Yes, sir.
trained to be qualified
Yes,
to
sir.
do the assessment
Yes,
work?
sir.
I encourage this. One thing I'm looking to do with the juvenile code is the
Yes,
very
sir.
same thing. It needs to be done. It should
Yeah, I
be
agree 100%.
absolutely done before we take anybody into custody in the state institutions. Have a risk assessment.
And to be fair to the defense bar, to the DAs and the judges, we've just recently started doing that to give them this information they can make the informed decisions that they're
As a
that
part of
they're
the
trained to do.
sentencing, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, I commend you for it.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Chairman, on my page, we'll make sure it's the same one. I'm moving on to page 37 of your document under the private prison programs. And my number is 18.9.1. 18.9.1.
Same as ours.
You'll see the annualization of the cost of those two facilities we just talked about, a full year's worth of funding for those two facilities.
Go back just a little bit and talk to us about the RSATs.
Sure, that's coming up
Oh, okay.
next, if that's okay. That's
All
my
right,
next
sure.
talking point. And I'll go directly to that if there are no questions on the private prisons.
All right, wait a minute. There was one question. Representative Neal.
I do have a question on the $35 million is to annualize the cost of the private prison expansion. Can you talk to us about the units at Wheeler and Coffee? Because I think there may be some interest or some need to. Am I right on potential need for Wheeler and Coffee? Or
I'm going to ask Becky to speak to that. My understanding is there'd be 200 beds at each facility coming offline. Is that correct, Becky?
There are 210 beds at Wheeler that are currently online that we had the money to fund this year that we would not have the money to fund next year. So it's 210 beds at Wheeler that would basically come offline.
so we're looking at adding the 2,650 beds through those two private prisons, but we're also looking at taking away 210 beds from each of those.
Yes, sir, just from one.
From
Just
Wheeler?
From Wheeler, yes, sir.
What about Coffee? Is there an ability to do 210 beds at Coffee as well?
I believe there is an ability to do 210 beds there as well.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the price per day of inmates in the correction system? An average price per day of an inmate?
And an average price per day from the privates, private facilities, depending on, there's two different price structures, and our old price structures, the ones that have been in existence for a while, the blended rate's roughly $44, $45 a day. The new facilities that are coming online now are $51, $52 a day. And when I say blended rate, it's two tiers. Basically, there's
Okay.
a 90% and then the 10% top tier is usually a little bit lower. Use that as an incentive for us to keep the beds filled.
When you're talking about the 210 beds at Wheeler, if we eliminate the funding for those 210 beds and they come offline, what are we paying per bed for those 210 beds at Wheeler?
Those 210 beds are at the old rate, so you're looking at a blended rate of approximately $44, $45 a day.
Is there a with those 210 beds, are we paying that $40 to $44 rate, or is that where we're getting a reduced rate because of the contract and the 90%?
It's a 90-10, so those 210 beds are split 90-10. The first 90% of the 210 would be the higher rate, 40, I can't remember the exact rate off the top, 46.06 or something like that a day, and then the last 10% would be 21 beds would be $20.96 a day. So blended, it's roughly 44-ish.
So if those 210 beds come offline, then the remaining beds at Wheeler are still on the 90 and 10. So the 10% of the
Absolutely.
remaining beds there we're getting for the reduced
still
rate.
Get that top 10% tier of a decreased rate. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So all of these 210 are not at the reduced rate.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then the final item I'd call to the committee's attention is on the same page, item 18.11.10. 18.11.10, if yours is the same, that's the 3 pre-release centers. Is that the same page, Mr. Chair? Same item? 18.11.10. You recall that we were scheduled to shut down 3 pre-release centers totaling about 600 beds effective January 1st of this year. Again, coming out of the Criminal Justice Reform Council, it was recommended and the governor has agreed to, instead of shutting those down, convert those to residential substance abuse treatment beds to give us 600 additional beds to treat offenders with drug problems. So the figure that you see here is annualizing those 600 beds roughly for a year's worth of funding.
What, say you have an offender who's been sentenced to 10 years in prison. Is that who goes into this, or a probationer?
Probation.
Probationer.
Now, let me clarify. One of the facilities that's a pre-release center is a female facility, and we don't have enough inmates to fill it, nor do we think we would have enough female probationers right away to fill it. So what we'd like to do is run what we call flex beds there. If you're a female coming out of the system and you need drug treatment, you go there. Or if you're a female coming into the system, instead of going to prison, you would come to this facility. So this particular facility would become both. Plenty of males, but the female population is sitting around 3,500.
But it's primarily geared towards probationers?
Yes, sir.
And so that would be something that would be utilized as an additional tool by
Yes, sir.
the accountability courts?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any kind of statistics on what kind of success that these kinds of treatment facilities have had in treating drug offenders?
It'll vary, Mr. Chairman, as you know. Defendants are going to be different.
Sure.
Some will be highly, highly addicted and we'll have lower success rates. Some will be marginally addicted and we'll have higher success rates. And I think part of our challenge as we move forward on criminal justice reform, just as Chairman Willard said, we've got to do really, really strong assessments to make sure we're putting the right kind of people in these drug treatment centers. But I've seen figures for every $1 you spend in drug treatment, inpatient drug treatment, you save $7 in reoffending costs. So I'm not trying to dance around. It's just hard to pin it down unless you can identify specifically who's coming into them.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. It's been brought to our attention, and maybe you can bring some light to it, that y'all do a different, in probation, a different call-in and reporting system than parole.
Yes, sir.
And yet a lot of the functions are the same, but theirs is more of an automated system, less manpower intensive. Could you go into why maybe we need to continue doing what we're doing in probation as opposed to converting to the parole system?
Yes, sir. I'd be glad to. If I may, I'd call my probation director, who's
Sure.
far more informed on this than I. So,
Sure.
Becky, if you could allow Mr. Cooper to come up. This is Stan Cooper. He's the Director of Probation Operations. He's responsible for all felony probationers across the state of Georgia. Currently has over 150,000 felony probationers under his supervision. Staff of about 1,500 trying to keep up with these 150,000 felony probationers. And Stan, I think you heard the question. If you wouldn't mind answering the chairman's question, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, 2 years ago, we started looking at ways, as you know, our caseloads, as the Commissioner mentioned, have just continued to grow. We started looking at ways and developing a system not only that would assist and relieve some of our officers that were already overburdened with the amount of offenders they were dealing with, but to assist them in supervising that caseload while maintaining public safety. One of the things that come back to was we have currently about 82,000 probationers, felony probationers, who we consider to be low risk based on a validated risk assessment that we currently use. At that point, we started looking how we could utilize technology to help us, not only relieve that, but also increase what we were doing with this number of offenders. And that's where the Probation Reporting Concept Center came out of. And basically what it does, the question was, why not go to something like parole has? A couple of different things right off the bat is that we're currently supervising a little over 22,000 offenders with the goal of about 50% of that population of our standard level cases going onto this type of system. we went into building this system around probationers, which is specific to, caseload supervision in conjunction with collection of fines, restitution, fees, those types of things, into our case management system that's specific to our case management system. So we did that. The other thing that comes into mind when you're talking about a private company doing this type of activities with probationers is when you go into a courtroom and you're going in before a judge concerning testifying from business records, we currently own our business records that is developed through this system. A company like AnyTrax would own the information contained in theirs. So we developed this probation reporting contact center specifically to probationers, felony probationers, with in mind that judges have to have confidence in what we're doing in order for us to utilize it. And that's why we elected to build our own internally versus going to something like what parole has right now, which is not a bad system for them, don't get me wrong. But for probationers, it presents many challenges too. The other thing is the cost effectiveness of it. We're currently paying about 9 cents a day to manage these offenders, and that is our call center handlers' salaries along with the technology involved through AT&T. So we feel like it's a relatively inexpensive alternative to assist us in managing these extremely high caseloads we have in probation operations. Currently, 83% of our felony probationers owe fines, fees, restitution to the courts. Our thoughts were back then and still are, if we add another fee to them, as little as this may be, we start overburdening probationers with offsetting costs and things. We may not get restitution in a case. We may not get a fine paid to the local government in that case. So that was another reason we elected to go with what we did versus going to a private company. So those are just a few of the reasons that we went this way. I can tell you now our collection rate right now is about, as far as probationers on this system, is about 70% statewide. Under normal supervision, that collection is about 38-39%. This is looked at as a way to reward offenders for good behavior if they're compliant. So we feel like it's working there. And we also, the compliance rate is right 94% with the offenders that's on there. So that's one of the many reasons we went to this system and built our own that's really focused on our felony population, our probationer population.
Any questions for the commissioner or for Stan? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Paroles?
Chairman, as you can probably tell by the hair and lack of a bow tie, I'm not Director Nail. He sends his apologies for not being able to be here today. I do know some of you, but for those of you that I don't, I'm Scott Maurer. I'm the Director of Operations Support for the Parole Board. I also have with me Beth Oxford, who's our Budget Director, and we're going to tag team through our presentation today. Each of you should have a PowerPoint in front of you. First, let me say that we fully support all the Governor's recommendations in the budget and have found that they will not in any way negatively impact our mission or our strategic plan. The first slide you see there is a few of the accomplishments that we wanted to review with your permission briefly before we move into the specific budget items. First of all, in the area of technology, over the past year we've implemented a electronic data and document management system referred to as CONS, which is our clemency online navigation system. It's basically initially set up to make the process from sentencing until release completely electronic. It also includes imaging all of the case files that we currently have that are paper files so that we can become fully electronic. Currently today, the board members are voting cases electronically. We're finished with the first phase of our implementation of cons and currently working on the second phase. In reference to, we had just mentioned the pilot for the voice recognition system that we implemented several months ago. We are using AntiTrax to supervise our low-risk offenders. It is a voice recognition software. It currently costs our offenders $7 a month to be on AntiTrax. We clearly don't have the resources that Corrections does to build our own team, and that's why we elected to go with a private company that wasn't going to cost our agency any money. We currently have about 3,200 offenders on AntiTrax software, and so far that process is working very well for us. With collaboration, we continue to increase our collaboration with Corrections and other law enforcement agencies. Many of our officers have been involved in task forces or in joint operations with law enforcement across the state. We currently have nearly 100 or a little over 100 parolees involved in day reporting center programs, and in all the operational community impact programs across the state, we have parole officers assigned along with Corrections and other law enforcement agencies. Increased reentry programming, the board members as well as our reentry unit continues to focus on finding partners in the community in order to assist with providing programming to our offenders as they're released from prison. There are a number of programs that we're currently considering adding to our lists and continue to have success finding some community partners with that. Consolidation, we've eliminated a couple of the unnecessary leases across the state, and we've combined our parole offices with probation offices into state-owned space. There's 5 offices that we closed last year. We closed Augusta, Rome, Dublin, Gainesville, and Louisville into state-owned space, and Ms. Oxford will also talk about what we have planned for this coming year as far as closing state offices. Consolidated offender payments with Department of Corrections. We have went into partnership with Corrections on consolidated banking process. It's kind of a one-step shop for offenders at this point, where whether they're on probation or parole, they can make their fines and fees and payments, restitution, both electronically and through one consolidated banking unit for both agencies. And so there's just a couple of things that we wanted to highlight that we've accomplished in the past year, and at this point I will turn it over to Ms. Oxford to talk about the budget reduction.
Okay, thank you. I'll be speaking from the tracking sheet, section number 34, but also if you'd like to follow along in the PowerPoint presentation, it might be a little bit simpler to look at the areas that I'm going to highlight. For the most part, we had just statewide changes in all of our budget programs. Also, most of the items that I'll talk about today are continuation from fiscal year 12 amended. I'll bring your attention down to the budget program of parole supervision, down to item number 34.3.7, reducing jail subsidy funds in the amount of $77,000. We have realized a reduction in our expenditures. This is the result of a policy change where we hold parole violators from an average of 10 days down to an average of only 3 to 5 days. Also, we have looked and are exploring refining our revocation process, and this has resulted in a reduction of number of days that parolees have to be held in county jails. Also, the next item, 20 additional parole officers. These officers would provide supervision for the max-out offenders, and this comes from the Criminal Justice Reform Council recommendations. Also, 34.3.12, reduce funds for contracts. These are small agency contracts that we've already discontinued. On 34.3.13, as Director Maurer stated, we have been very aggressively working with the Department of Corrections to consolidate office locations and to close space and moved into state-owned space wherever possible. Last year, those 5 locations, we gave back $270,000 in last year's budget reduction. This particular item is at the end of this fiscal year, we plan to close our Athens parole office and move into the Athens Day Reporting Center. The next item, 34.3.14, this is $800 of this eliminates our certification for the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police law enforcement certification. These are costs related to annual dues and reassessments. And also contained in this dollar amount is $7,800, where we have already closed our Cuthbert parole office and assimilated those staff into our Albany office. We also have 3 redirections in the fiscal year 13 budget, and if you want to look at the PowerPoint presentation, it is simpler to look at this page for a summary of what those redirections are. All of these 3 will be budget neutral. The first item are just staff transfers. This is a housekeeping issue. These positions, 6 positions, due to reorganization, need to be moved so that their function will be aligned with the proper budget program. The next is parole investigator transfer to the clemency program. Currently, we have 74 positions for parole investigators. They are located around the state and do background investigations for the parole board on which they make their parole decisions, but rightfully they belong in the clemency budget program because all the work that they do goes into the parole decision-making process. And then finally, the call center funds. We ask that these funds be transferred to the Department of Corrections. We have come up with a joint call center, and this is for the general public or for inmate families to call in. Between the 2 agencies, we field on average about 50,000 phone calls per month. And what we were finding is oftentimes they would call parole, asking about their parole date, but once they were on the phone, they either needed Department of Corrections or had a Department of Corrections issue that they wanted answered. So we sent them 5 staff, and we've cross-trained all the staff, corrections and parole, to answer questions from both agencies. So it's a single point of contact for both departments. We're currently already operating this call center, and we're operating on an MOU. It was effective October 1st of last year. So we're just asking for the funds to be transferred along with the staff.
Wait just a minute. We got a couple of questions. Chairman Willard?
I just want to inquire a little more into the workings between probation and parole. Do you think we're eventually working toward a combination of those 2 offices and services? And I ask this in the sense that we have redundancy. We're seeing redundancy here. And I realize there may be a different level of some training going into probation as opposed to parole, one way or the other. But is there expected someday to be open the idea of a combination of those 2 services because of redundancy?
There are a lot of similar roles and functions that probation and parole officers have. There are many aspects of their job that are similar. There are some differences. I don't know that we continue to work towards interoperability. So the recommendations that we've made here and that we've worked on for the past several years is to where we can join efforts, continue to join efforts. I don't necessarily know whether or not that leads to a joint agency down the road at some point. I can just tell you that where we have recognized that there's a lot of duplicate effort going on, we're trying to work in conjunction with Department of Corrections and probation operations to make sure that we're doing it together.
So your offices are combined in some places as far as real estate, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you have still no inner workings between what may be a person on probation or someone on parole. You have still a clear division of people working either for probation individuals or parole individuals.
Yes, sir. We're sharing information on those cases back and forth, but as far as the supervision of those cases, that their parole officers are supervising the parolees and probationers.
Thank you.
Chairman Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our maxed out population, I know this, the 1.4 million that the governor has recommended is based on the 1,500 that maxed out last year without supervision. Have you went back to look at the last several years to see if that's and projecting forward to see if that's going to be a fairly consistent number, or what's your thoughts on the consistency of that 1,500?
When we did the projection, we did look at previous years, and has been a fairly consistent number over several years, and so we feel that it will continue to remain about the same.
Okay, and obviously, I think just about everybody agrees that if you can get them out a few months earlier and have supervision rather than patting them on the back and wishing them good luck, we're much better off. Another question I wanted to ask you. I know that right now, especially with mental health and sexual offender population within the Department of Corrections, we have hundreds of inmates that are beyond their parole date. Do you have those numbers?
No, sir, I don't have them right now, but I can certainly make sure we get them to you as soon as possible.
And we're doing we do a temporary housing, $20 a day for 90 days for those who need some assistance, no housing, and they're ready to be paroled out. And obviously the ability to save money within corrections parole is, as you are working together to get these individuals that have surpassed that parole date into those homes. And we toured Holly Tree in DeKalb County with Director Nell and several others a little over a week ago, and those mental health offenders that are costing us upwards of $100 a day instead of the $50 a day or so that most are. Is there any efforts being made to look at increasing the opportunities with those housing subsidies to get some of these offenders out a little bit earlier and allow them to begin assimilating into the community at a much less expensive rate to the state than the $100 a day we're currently paying for them?
Yes, sir. We are actually currently in the process of redoing the MOU with the Department of Corrections on our RPH funding. And one of the things that we're currently considering is implementing a tier system specifically for those mental health cases that there are more costs associated with releasing them to those providers. And so we don't have any hard data yet because we're just now starting to look at what that cost would be, but it is something we're considering in the new MOU.
When you look at $20 a day, especially for a mental health offender that needs services within the community,
yes, sir.
$20 a day just scratches the surface. So if we can do the tiered system, while we're going to have to look at more than $20 a day, it's still substantially less than the $100 a day that we're paying in corrections. Have you given any thought to extending that out beyond the 90 days and trying it just seems like to me that if we can get these offenders out, even if we have to extend out a little bit that RPH beyond the 90 days, if we can get them out at a substantial cost savings, that's something we need to be looking at doing. Have you given any thought to that?
Not at this point. We actually have, in the past year, or maybe a little bit more than a year, have reduced that because what was happening at times is we would have people refer to those housing providers and they would leave shortly after getting there because they would find stable housing somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And that investment up front that we paid for more than the initial 60 days was money that we were losing. But that's certainly, now that we're in the process of renegotiating, something that we can, again, consider.
Does it have to be paid up front when they're released, or can we have a means of, because even at 90 days, if you're paying 90 days and they're leaving after 30, you've paid 90 days and they're gone. Is there a way that we can look at doing monthly payments instead of an upfront payment?
Yes, sir, we can. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And especially when you're looking at this mental health offender, the chances of those mental health offenders, especially those that require a substantial amount of services within the community, the chances of those offenders finding stable housing within 90 days is fairly slim, I would imagine.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Talk to us a little bit about the 20 additional officers that are in the budget.
Based on the current recommendations of the Criminal Justice Reform Council, it was recommended that 6 months supervision follow anybody that maxes out from prison. That would be anybody that does not have probation to follow, both those that the board voted to max out and those that were truly max outs. Taking that number, we looked at keeping our current caseloads where they are. It would take us approximately 20 officers to supervise those offenders in our specialized supervision. Specialized supervision, our recommended caseload for those officers is about 40 to 1. And the reason why those specialized officers would be supervising those offenders is because they're obviously going to be our highest risk, some of our most difficult offenders to supervise, especially for a 6-month period. That's a fairly short amount of time to supervise an offender. As we all know, the max outs are going to be your more violent, those that the board have voted to max out. So that's what we based that that number on, the 20 positions that we would need. Now, if there's any change in the way that legislation is written, that would obviously impact whether or not we need 20 officers, or whether or not, for example, if it were part of that sentence were probated, then of course those positions would not necessarily be needed by parole. So it really kind of comes down to the way the legislation is written once it's introduced. But to maintain our current caseloads at what the averages are now, that's the number of positions we would need to supervise those offenders.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you. All right, Firefighter Standards and Training Council.
Good afternoon.
Surprise, surprise. How you doing?
Public safety, okay, 38.9 to the next page. Number 38.9 is where it started. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
I'm showing on my tracking document, page 87, 38.91 through 38.95. Now, these are simply 91 through 95 are adjustments in employer share of the state health benefit plan and the retirement system and workers' comp and unemployment insurance premiums and general liability premiums. Now this is the governor's recommendation, and we of course have no problem with that. But if you look at the handout that my cohort gave, and this is Chad Cobb, he is a manager with us over our evaluation division. I'll give you a quick rundown on where we stand as an agency. Last year, House Bill 78 made some significant changes for our agency. We reduced funds for a vacant administrative assistant position and reduced field staff by administering firefighter exams online. Now, since '08, that brought us down to a 20% reduction in staff and 31% reduction in funding. Now, this leaves us with a operating expenses of 4%. 96% of our budget is used for personal services. Now, that kind of gives you an idea of where we're at now financially. Now, in moving toward online testing, as we were instructed last year, we have been working hard on that since August, and we now have 6 volunteer test sites that have agreed to with us to participate in some beta testing. And you can see there, it's Georgia Northwestern Technical College and the Public Safety Training Center, McDuffie County Fire Department, Rome Fire Department, Southern Crescent Technical College, and Walton County Fire. Now, we have, to date, we have administered 209 online tests there. And we've had some problems. This is the first time we've done this. We're having some technical issues, and we're working through it. But we have really high expectations for this process. And you can also see below that on some statistics on evaluations. Our agency has delivered over 11,000 written tests, 9,000 skills tests. We've given over 600 tests in our office, and of course I mentioned the online 290 tests that we gave online. There's 641 fire departments in this great state, and we have over 31,600 firefighters. Now, in 2011, we issued over 1,000 state certifications, and we got brand new 1,477 volunteers. Now, I mentioned a little bit about our evaluation program. We also have a compliance program, whereas we go by and we view fire departments throughout the state. We go by and assure that they meet the minimum requirements. We assist them to meet the minimum requirements if they don't. So last year we visited 267 of the 641 departments. We really wanted to get on a 2-year rotation schedule, and we were on a 2-year rotation schedule until we had to reduce that other field staff person last year. So that kind of gives you an online thumbnail sketch as to what our agency is doing to help assure that the firefighters in this state are meeting the established minimum requirements, and the fire departments in this state are doing the same. Do you have any questions?
All right, committee members. We're going to have a little bit of discussion. We've had some questions, maybe a carryover from last year.
Sure.
From some of the concerns of a lot of the volunteer fire departments, and I think we want to get into that. Is any of the members want to address this? Do we have anybody representing the volunteers or any of the local fire departments out there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jackie Gibbs, Fire Chief up in Marietta. I don't represent the volunteer side or the issue, but one of the things the agencies talked about, and we appreciate it, is they've last year moved into more of the internet testing. That's been a good step. They're trying to go to a testing site arrangement. We'd encourage them and the committee to go bold and go further, and that is to just give the test online so you can sit down in your fire station, take the test. And not worry about these sites, because we have to move people to the site to take the test, and we're doing pretty much everything by internet these days. The state EMS, for example, they changed all EMS protocols this year, and all of those tests are being given online. So sometimes there's a hesitation to not go bold and go on out there, but we think it's a safe bet when you're talking about a minimum test. The other thing is we're doing a lot of inspections, and those are needed sometimes. But from my standpoint, we're doing sometimes too much of that investment. We are talking about a minimum standard here, and the standard is the minimum. So from a fire engine that's not staffed in a pole barn in most rural Georgia has exactly the same minimum standard as a piece of fire equipment in the city of Atlanta. And so you can see, to go and inspect all of the fire engines in the city of Atlanta, Cobb, Marietta, Gwinnett, when you're looking for the same minimum standard equipment, or the same training records in a small rural department, maybe a little bit of savings that could be accomplished by redirecting some of that to get some more certifications out there, the things we need, which is more classes delivered at the academy. So with that, I'll answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. You got your button on. All right. You're recognized.
Last year, our volunteer fire, the volunteers,
Yes, sir.
the standards. Explain us the where are y'all trying to get with our volunteers? It seems like they're on the training and everything. Is everything on for these guys out there? Is it becoming more difficult for our volunteers to? Are we making it increasingly difficult for them to maintain the training and everything? I think there was some discussion about that last year, and certainly they don't have training on an everyday basis like we do in the metro area. So can you kind of tell us where you're at with that? Because I know there's some concerns there.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. About 2.5 years ago, our council appointed a committee to upgrade our rules. Our agency was created in 1975, and I am ashamed to say that our administrative rules have not been updated since our agency was created. Since that time, legislation has changed, giving our agency the statutory responsibility of certifying fire departments, of assuring that every single firefighter, including those volunteers, are trained to a minimum and established minimum level of training statewide. So for 2.5 years now, we've been working on these rules. And what I have done through the past is I have gone to these regional meetings and I have met with fire departments, both rural and city fire departments, and gave them updates on where we stood on our administrative rules. And those changes have been, there's been a lot of changes in that. We have listened, we the council have listened to a lot of these suggestions about volunteers have actually looked at us and said, looked at me and said, you're trying to put us out of business. And that absolutely is not the case. When I started as a volunteer in commerce, the fire chief said, there lays a lot of turnout gear. Find something to put you on that fits, and you are one. That's not what we want. We want the firefighters of this state, be it paid or volunteer, to have at least a minimum level of training. So there were some concerns there. This Rules Committee had this project for 2 years. They have since turned it over to our council, and our council has been working on it for about 6 months. And our council has been working on this line by line, word by word. And there's been a good many changes. We're not having a lot of pushback as far as the volunteers are saying you're trying to put us out of business, because things evolve. So we're in a position now, we're renumbering the rules, and I'm preparing and gearing up to also go and visit all these regional sites and answer questions and explain the rules where we're at prior to the promulgation process. So we have had some pushback, but it is progress. The bottom line is, do we, as a state of Georgia, want to have minimum requirements, absolute, very minimal requirements to train our firefighters in the state of Georgia?
Do the volunteers have representation on your council or on your rules committee?
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
On the Rules Committee, we invited 34 organizations. About half were volunteers on the invites. We invited the Chiefs Association, the Firefighter Association, GMA, ACCG, several other organizations. Now, we met mostly during the week, and quite honestly, the volunteers didn't have a lot of time to show up during the week because they were working. But as the process worked, we do have volunteer fire chief on our council. We have people that have volunteer experience that can speak up for the volunteers on the council, and they are getting a say-so. And these regional meetings that I go to, I write this down and I bring it back to the council, and they've been really good about listening to this. It's not a done deal. Our rules isn't. And obviously, you guys know that through the promulgation process, we give it to you. And if there's something in the rules that you don't like, then you, of course, have the legal authority to make some changes in it as well. So that's where we're at there.
But y'all are addressing their concerns also, of course.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from any of the committee members? I'm glad to hear, Mr. Porter, I'm glad to hear what you're saying. Last year, I think at this time, we were talking about a lot of the concerns that we were hearing from a good many of the volunteer firemen in their stations around the state. And they had almost taken a perception that the Standards Council was trying to basically weed them out,
Yes.
which would have been a move to go into a hired fire status, which would be quite expensive in a lot of the rural counties, but things seem to have worked out considerably since last year.
There have been, and you know, in the fire service, as with any organization, when you have rumors abound, then sometimes facts get kind of intermingled with fiction. And that's why I really like to go out and give these regional meetings. And when I do that, I get a lot of, initially these people say, but I heard, and I love to hear that because then we can address it with the facts of what's going on. Now back to addressing and doing site visits at fire departments throughout the state. As I mentioned, it was our intent to have a 2-year site visit to visit every department in the state, the ones in Atlanta and the brand newest fire departments in Brantley County or wherever it is. And there is one standard for fire departments in the state. Minimum equipment, very minimal equipment. And we do check the large departments just like we do the small. And we do have adjustments that need to be made on the large departments just like the small. So in my opinion, it is important for us to go out, number one, to have one-on-one contact with these fire departments. Number two, answer these questions on rules so we can be in their fire station and talk to them about this. And number three, help them if they have any deficiencies. Because let's face it, in the rural area, they don't get a lot of attention on the state level, on any of the state level. And we like to come in there and show them that we are truly on their side. We are firefighters, and we work for them.
Very good. Any other questions? I've only got one question, and I'm not quite sure because it's on my sheet that needed to be asked. Something about the double background and fingerprinting for firefighters who are also EMTs.
Double background? I'm not familiar.
I can shed some light on that. We passed legislation last year requiring a background check for EMT certification. What we didn't intend with that legislation was for the department to do rules and regs that would require firefighters who already have had a criminal background check and are licensed firefighters employed by municipal and county fire departments to have to do another background check, and worse than just doing another background check, forbidding them from using the same background check done at the sheriff's department or the police, but instead going to a pawn shop and paying $57 to get a criminal background check done by a vendor selected by the department when they've already had criminal background checks to be firefighters. And I have actually introduced legislation to try to take care of that, just in case the department doesn't change rules and regs.
If I may comment
Please.
on that, I feel certain, I can't speak for our council, but I can certainly say I feel certain that if we have a background check that was presented to us through an EMS organization in Georgia, it's a background check. All we're looking for is criminal history. And we only want that this not be over 18 months old, and we'll accept it.
The problem is the other way around. Those who are looking for EMS certification that are firefighters with criminal background checks, they're not accepting the firefighters' criminal background check. They're making them go out and get another criminal background check. My local fire chief sent me an email for their firefighters to be able to get EMT licensure. They have to go to a pawn shop in Ringo to get their criminal background check done.
Using the GAPS system.
Do we have any other questions from any of the committee members? Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity.
Department of Law. Oops.
Good afternoon, Chairman. I'm here with Ann Bentley, our Director of Operations. I don't have a PowerPoint, don't have a 5-page presentation. Excuse me? No cartoons? No cartoons either, Chairman. Well,
That tells you the destitute state that y'all are in. Every penny counts over there.
it's the state of our budget, you know.
Have at it.
I'll make a couple short comments and I'd be happy to take any questions. If you look on our one page for the budget, the 32.1-9, I believe, hopefully OPB has told you that that number doesn't include benefits, or was not intended. It was intended to have benefits attached to that, where we would request an increase there. If you look to the line immediately below at 32.1-10, that is for a lower paying position for those two positions dealing with the cheating scandal in APS. So those positions have money for the pensions, excuse me, the benefits, but the one 32.1.1 does not have the money for the state benefits. As a general statement, we're really pleased with the governor's recommendation. We're getting the one position back. Last year we lost 7. That would be one position back. We still have the same old issues. Candidly, we keep losing lawyers to other state agencies. And many state agencies are hiring lawyers for $10,000 more than we're hiring lawyers. They can't go in a courtroom, they can't represent the state, but they're $10,000 more than my lawyers, which frankly makes no sense. There was a 2008 Carl Vinson study that y'all are familiar with that talked about increasing our lawyer salaries. With the recession, they've only gone down. And each year we keep reducing the starting salary because I can't pay the 4th-year lawyer the same as the 1st-year lawyer. So I'm now down to $50,000 for a starting salary. And let me suggest to you that a lot of the lawyers that want to work in our department, I don't want to hire because I'm not able to get the type of lawyer you want representing the state of Georgia for the current salary that we have. Concurrently, we're seeing an increase in SAG cost, an increase in outside lawyers because of the reduction in lawyers in our department. So, for instance, we're running into delays with the licensing boards. We're running into delays with the general government section, the environment section, and the transactions unit. I've had several representatives this session say, when are you going to get that deal done in my local area? And I'll report back, well, it's number 14 or number 17 on the list. And it's just, there's only so many years you can keep having reductions in lawyers and having the ability to get the work out in a timely manner. And unfortunately, a lot of times the General Assembly says, well, we're going to give you a SAG, an outside lawyer, but the SAG's generally twice the cost of in-house. So it frankly doesn't make sense from a budget perspective. We'd appreciate any assistance the committee could give us. I will tell you that as Chairman Willard has teased me numerous times, our office is much more proactive, working much closer with many representatives. I know one day I saw Representative Burns with an issue, and I think the next day gave him an answer. So we're trying to be very proactive with the legislature, give them the answers, get letters back. But candidly, we don't have enough lawyers to do it in the fashion that you'd like. And that would be my comment, sir.
All right. Question, Chairman Willard.
I wanted to go a little further. Tell me, what is the total number of approved attorney slots that you have with your department now?
I think we have, what, 127?
About
About 127.
How many vacancies do you have?
I don't,
9 vacancies?
9 currently.
Is that about what it runs on a, I'll call it attrition basis over a period of time, or is this lower, higher, middle?
That's what it runs now. There was a time when we were full all the time. We would replace one as quickly as one left. But I'd say for the last 2 years, we've probably had at least 9 vacancies.
we're overtly, Chairman, not immediately replacing the positions to stay within budget. The prior year, my folks had furloughs. This year so far, they haven't had any furlough days, so I have chosen to delay the hiring so that at the same time they're not getting an increased salary, they're not having the reduction from the furloughs.
Another area, as far as your special attorney generals and putting aside the ones that do the child support, which are a whole class of their own.
Sure.
How much of your volume of work do you currently see going to outside SAGs as opposed to being handled inside?
About 40% of the outside cost is child support and defects. Of the balance of the 60, there clearly is some that is of a specialized area where I would really need to maintain that outside. But I mean, I could clearly hire 20 new lawyers inside our office, save the state a minimum of $3 million net, and frankly have a more efficient system. We, for the first time, in 2006, I believe we were given lawyers, which really brought most of the workers' comp in-house.
Right.
We now are needing to once again send cases outside counsel.
In fact, how many? About 20 approved?
We had 20 approved in 2006. It was a $3 million
Yeah.
net savings to the state.
Yeah.
But since then, we've lost 7 or 9 positions, so I'm starting to have the opposite problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman Purcell.
Just as clarification, with the situation with the Atlanta school systems, information that keeps coming to us through the education department with renewal of contracts, is this going to add more demand to your office if they don't resolve this before whenever those contracts could be automatically renewed?
Well, frankly, I'm very disappointed that more files haven't been brought from the DA's office to the Professional Standards Commission. We were certainly hopeful that the DA was going to be giving us pretty much all of the teacher files by the end of the last calendar year. In the new budget, it has 2 limited positions to assist with that. That's that 32-110. But candidly, I for one find it really disappointing that the Professional Standards Commission in my office doesn't have those cases already.
So that could be an additional problem for your office in terms of financial.
It could be, but candidly, the 2 positions that the governor recommended for that issue should be sufficient. It's just frustrating, I think, for all of us that they're looking at the issuances of new, when this frankly should have been handled already.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Burns.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you. That was a quick turnaround on that question I asked you. You said a lot of people, a lot of work. So
thank you, sir.
In a perfect world, what is that? What should that starting salary? What should it be, and that will take to get the right kind of folks, the right qualification?
The 2000 Carl Vinson Institute had a pay structure, and we've given this committee that study before. I could certainly do so again. At the time, it had our starting salary going up to $56,000, and then it had it going over several years to, I believe, the 60. I'm now literally at the 50, and your next question may be, well, do you literally have any lawyers under the 55,000? And the answer is I have either 4 or 5 that are between that 50 and 55,000. So we, in fact, are hiring lawyers less than 55 to make up the difference between a lawyer with more experience and not. It is approximately a $675,000 item to adopt what the legislature approved in 2008 for the Carl Vinson Institute study. You may recall that right after Governor Perdue accepted the recommendations and put it in the budget, the recession hit, and the governor stayed all of that process. And I'm not here to quarrel, disagree, complain, because that was at a time, as you know, where you needed to make cuts wherever you could to have a balanced state budget. So the Carl Vinson Institute report was approved right when the recession was rearing its head. And candidly, I could make improvements short of that, just going in the right direction. What's hurting me most from a morale perspective and from a competency perspective is not being able to take any steps, both with the number of lawyers or the starting salary.
Please.
how far off are you on the salaries with other agencies and serving in a similar capacity?
Well, let me suggest they aren't similar because their lawyers can't go to court. Their lawyers don't have attorney-client privilege. Having said that, I can, I'm reluctant to say the name of state agencies, but I mean, we know that there are state agencies that are routinely starting their lawyers at $60,000. My lawyers are $10,000 less than that for starting salary. We lose lawyers routinely. We lost another lawyer this year at the DOT. We lost a lawyer for about an $8,000 increase, a $4,000 increase, a $14,000 increase. It's okay if I can't compete with the Fulton DA's office. I'm certainly in no way, shape, or form trying to compete with the private practice. But it is downright frustrating when I can't compete with state agencies. Thank you, sir.
We have heard somewhere in the past, and I don't remember the numbers, but what are the numbers of attorneys working for other state agencies? Do you know what that amounts to?
The House Budget Office came out with that number last year, and I wanted to say it was about 188. It literally was more lawyers than we have in-house.
Mm-hmm.
And having said that, not all of them do law. It was just that they're lawyers. But I believe the number was 188 in the House budget.
So as lawyers, they are not necessarily hired in the capacity as a legal position.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I mean, the House Budget Office, frankly, did a really good job with that report last year. We had no qualms with what it said. I mean, it highlighted significant issues, and they did a very nice job.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other committee member have a question? Sam, I'd like to just say something. The idea of the SAGs, this is a recurring issue that we deal with. And I was asking Kendra, and you, Mike, can verify, we build in there's probably roughly $30 million spread throughout all these agencies that go to SAGs. You made a comment a while ago that your predecessor had made, his predecessor had made years ago about how much could be saved by going to staff attorneys as opposed to using SAG money. You'd said that, and it might have just been off the top, $3 million can be saved.
It was when the state gave us 20 new lawyers in 2006, I believe the net savings was $2.9 million.
Any way that we could get some hard numbers of, say, how many would it take? You said $3 million could be saved if you had how many attorneys? You said it a while ago.
Well, when it was 20, it was a $2.9 million savings. I don't have any reason to think it would be any different. Once again, where the trick comes, Chairman, is at the time that you give me potentially new positions, you have to wean that money off of the agencies, or else you're not getting in net savings. So, for instance, if you give me the money, and clearly it's right, it's got to take me X number of months to do the hiring for the kind of lawyers you want me to hire. But then once that hiring occurs, you've got to reduce the money from those agencies or you won't have the savings. So it's dependent on removing.
I guess what I'm saying is y'all have control of the timesheet. Y'all know through y'all's agency how much in the timesheets for SAG attorneys and across what agencies are using them, of which one of those agencies or the various agencies, if that money could be weaned off and sent to y'all.
Yes, sir.
As a proposition.
We could send you documentation. I believe in last year's presentation, we literally stated that if we were given, I think, 16 positions, there was X dollars, and we can get that back to you, sir.
Yeah, if you would send it to Kendra, and just a general idea, because the way I've got the figure, the way this would work, if you submitted an idea by looking at your timesheets of which agencies y'all are representing in certain issues, if y'all had those in-house staff counsel, then that would be SAG. SAG monies that wouldn't have to be used. It'd have to be attritioned into something like that.
Yes, sir.
I was going to say, same thing, Mr. Chairman, that is, I think this committee and the General Assembly has confidence in your office giving us a blueprint of where we can make those type of changes over time. Just say you can't do it overnight.
Sure.
But take the ones that you see where SAGs are utilized that could better be staffed through full-time counsel with your office, and let's start trying to see where we could make that change.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Sure. That's exactly what I was talking about. If you could get us the numbers, we couldn't do it overnight. But if you could show where there was $6 million worth of SAG expense from certain agencies that could be transferred out to go into replacement of staff attorneys. And we've been doing this, and it always gets caught up over so many years.
Other issue is going to be space. What are y'all doing now?
Well, candidly, we have two issues there, frankly. Well, one issue is we do have some space in the old library that if there was some flexibility, we could be, frankly, putting some lawyers in that area, and that's right here. The other,
What's it utilized for now?
well, we don't use the library nearly as much as years ago, sir. So
No, I know. We did away with it.
right now, it's mainly the archives for old files before it's sent to archives.
Okay.
So
Your
it's
files?
full of boxes, yes, sir.
Okay.
The other issue from a down-the-road type issue, when the legislature moved Medicaid fraud to the AG's office in full last session, that staff, which is about 45 folks, are still in Tucker at the Oglethorpe Power headquarters. And to the extent there was space with the state over time, it certainly would be cheaper to move them into state space than the lease with Oglethorpe. But I don't have the money, for instance, to move them to
Well,
state
I'm
space.
asking, you're looking at expanding your office with other removal of SAGs, more staff attorneys, and do we have area to put them? And the question is, she shakes her head no, and you're saying partly yes.
Well, at one point, I believe GBA told us that there was some space that they thought was going to be available at Sloppy Floyd. So
Okay.
I may not have it in my exact
But you got
footprint.
areas.
Right. I mean, it was my understanding that the state thought they could give us some space in Sloppy Floyd, but I don't have the money to move the unit over to Sloppy Floyd.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And it's just as a footnote, it's always good to see our old friend Darrell with you today. He's not planning on retiring anytime soon, is he?
But Darrell's got 38 years? 36, I'm sorry. John Ballard has 38, and Darrell's quote-unquote my counsel, and does an excellent job. And
Darrell's not only one of the nicest guys on Capitol Hill, but he counsels a lot of folks.
absolutely, and then Jeff Milstein, the number 2 in the office, is protecting Darrell.
If there's no other questions, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day, and we'll get documentation to Kendra. Thank you.
Superior Courts.
Superior Courts. This looks like the A team. Lawton, you might as well come on up to the front bench too.
He gave me sage Wilson. He says, "Don't mess up." Mr. Chairman, we're tracking sheet page 9 out of 20. Let's see, page 9, I believe, and we've got just a few items, so I'll be as brief as I can. And unless you want to do it in a different format, I'll just walk through the ones that we have. Starting with the council office in 9.1.1, we've asked for an enhancement item for 2 positions in the council office for the purpose of basically setting up our own training program. If y'all will recall, there was language in the budget document last year that suggested in rather stringent terms that the ICJE, the Institute of Continuing Judicial Education, needed to be self-sufficient going forward. We take the position that as state employees, I mean, the state's got a responsibility to provide training for the judges of the state. with a certain evidence code that was adopted by the General Assembly and certain other items. Just read. We do feel, those of us who graduated many years ago, that we do need some training on the rules of evidence and other things. So we feel like it's imperative that we have training. Our council has voted to support full funding for ICJE. That would be our preference. But if the General Assembly is not inclined to fund ICJE, we're going to need some funding from the General Assembly to bring that training in-house. And it's basically in two sections. Under the council office would be the two people to actually put the training together, and then down later in the Superior Courts there's some of the tangential expenses associated with the travel and training materials and such as that. But that $158,000 for those two positions is really a contingent request. It's a request that you give us the money to bring the training in-house if the General Assembly sees fit not to fund ICJE. If you're going to fund ICJE with sufficient funds to conduct the training, then we would withdraw that request. We wouldn't need it. But we don't need both, but we need one or the other. The 9.1.2 is some money to provide additional funding for temporary labor. Basically, we've lost 4 positions in the council office in the last 3 or 4 years. We're currently using 3 part-time law student interns to do some of that work, and we'd like to have the funding to be able to continue to use those part-time interns as opposed to having to try and replace those positions on a permanent basis. As far as the judicial administrative districts, or the DCAs as we refer to them, we've requested $66,239 to restore a portion of the operating funds that have been lost by the judicial administrative districts. They've lost $271,000, or 52% of their total operating expenses between FY09 and FY12. That money is money that's for travel, almost exclusively for travel and rent of the offices for these 10 administrative districts. For example, my DCA has an office in Lyons, and he covers 27 counties. He's got to have some money to be able to travel to go to the courthouses and meet with the judges that serve. And again, we're trying to do this incrementally. I know when I met with Chairman Powell, we talked about some possible enhancements, and he told me, he said, don't be greedy. So we've developed a term that we don't want to cross the greedy line on anything. But we do want to see if we can get some incremental replacement of the funds that have been lost, because the JADs are down to where they almost have nothing to operate with now. The other part of theirs is the 9.2.2 is simply to basically take the 6 furlough days that have been built into the base budget, and so that we don't have furlough days as part of our base budget anymore. We can at least pay them what they were supposed to have been paid when they were hired. Under the Superior Court judges budget, 9.3.1 is again the increase in funding associated with if we bring the training in-house. $26,000 of that is for training and materials, and then $76,600 would be to add 1 day to our current training. One of the problems that we're having, quite frankly, is we used to have 5 days for our training programs. We're down to 2.5. One of those days is for our committee meetings. As Chairman Willard knows, uniform rules, pattern juries. We're down to where they're trying to meet like an hour. We can't get our work done in the amount of time that we have. If we can just add 1 day to our training, because that's for the committee meetings, and then 1.5 days right now to do all of our CLE hours and do our business meetings. And we've crammed things so tight. We're starting before 8 o'clock and ending after 7 o'clock in the evenings, and we really would like some relief where we can expand our conference by 1 day to give these committees a fair amount of time to do the work that they have to do and be able to do the requisite training that we need. 9.3.2 is to restore to the base budget reductions for travel. There was what we thought was a one-time FY11 amended budget reduction for our travel, and somehow it got put in our base budget. There's $128,000. That's half of our travel money, and we really need to have that money restored. It was never intended, at least by us, to be part of our ongoing continuation budget. As part of our base budget, that was a one-time, or what was offered up is a one-time reduction, and it's gotten carried forward. 9.3.3, there were originally 25 not what we refer to as non-statutory law clerk positions. What we refer to as the statutory law clerk positions is each circuit is allocated one law clerk position. That's whether you've got 20 judges in that circuit or 2 judges in that circuit. As new judgeships were created over the last several years, a pattern developed to include in the funding component for that new judgeship the judge, the secretary, and 1 law clerk. Over time, there were 25 of those law clerk and what we refer to as the non-statutory law clerk positions that were created. Because of the budgetary limitations, we've lost 14 of those 25 positions. They're just gone. The other remaining 11 have been subject to a hiring freeze such that if anybody lost one, they couldn't replace them. There are 2 components to our request. One is to unfreeze those 11 that we've got left so that if we lose one, we can at least replace them. That's fiscally neutral because the money's already in the budget for those positions. We just want to be able to replace them if we lose them. In addition, the 14 that we lost, we're asking again as an incremental sort of trying to get a little bit back of what's been lost. We've asked for funding for 2 of those positions. Now, I've been asked a question on the side, well, where are you going to put those 2? And we haven't made that decision. If y'all want to enlighten us, we'll be glad to take in consideration what y'all think. Our plan, quite frankly, was going to see where the need was the greatest and try and replace them because I'm assuming there'll be fairly significant competition among those who've lost their law clerk to try and replace that law clerk because they all can advance a cause of why they really need to have theirs replaced. Lastly, the 9.3.4 is again to restore 6 furlough days in the Superior Courts. This has been built into the base budget for the secretaries and the law clerks that work in the Superior Courts. I'd like to at least be able to pay my people what I told them I would pay them when I hired them. And right now we can't do that because of the 6 furlough days that are built into the base budget. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions that any member of the committee might have.
Thank you, Judge. Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Judge, just a couple of areas. Talk about the law clerks with me for a moment.
Yes, sir.
Many of them are funded locally by the counties.
Those that are county funded are not addressed at all in this.
All right.
That's something that the counties do on their own. Some circuits do, some circuits don't.
I'm asking, though, as to the ones that have been slots eliminated by state budget, have those been filled in some cases or all cases by local funding?
I don't think so. They may have been one.
Do you know just one?
I think in Hall County,
Hall County
is the only one that I'm aware of.
Okay, so the ones that have been vacated because of the drop in budget funding have actually been left open or lost?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Second thing, educate me a little more about the continuing judicial education. I know in the past I enjoyed going down and being with y'all when you had your seminars at St. Simon's, and that's not done now. How are they doing it now? Are they doing it in district areas?
No, sir. We have 2 meetings a year, and part of the bylaws of the Council of Superior Court Judges, we're required to have semi-annual meetings. We conduct those in conjunction with the training, so we don't travel 2 times to do 2 different things. What used to be 5-day conferences are now 2.5-day conferences. The first day is dedicated to the committee meetings that we have, whether it be, like I said, pattern jury instructions, legislative, uniform rules is one that takes a lot of time. We've got a number of standing committees, and they meet that first day. The remaining day and a half is dedicated to the the continuing judicial education component, where we have to have so many hours of training. In addition to that, we have to do the business meeting for the council, because the rules that are worked on through those committees come up for first reading, second reading, and eventual adoption by our council, and then are submitted to the Supreme Court for their final approval. So, I mean, we're jam-packed trying to do what we used to do in 5 days and 2.5 days, and we really need a little more time.
Let me carry the thought a little further, too. The request is for 2 positions which will provide in-house continuing judicial education. And I'm looking at redundancy again. We have in the Judicial Council positions that provide for continuing judicial education. Is there any reason why we need to have a separate judicial education for Superior Court judges, as opposed to, I know they do it different times and all, but staffing-wise, Superior Court having its own staffing as opposed to the Judicial Council having staffing that covers Superior Court, State Court, Probate Court, Magistrate Court, all the judicial education programs that need to be done?
As far as I know, all the training for the various classes of court has been conducted in conjunction with ICJE, which is the Institute of Continuing Judicial Education. We use ICJE for our training as well. We are state employees, and there is money appropriated from the General Assembly that help defray part of the cost of us.
I understand.
Most of the lower classes of court that are county-paid judges, a lot of their expenses are borne by either registration fees or funds from the counties.
I understand for the trip, but we have a line item 6.3 under the Judicial Council, which is the Institute of Continuing Judicial Education, which I assume is a staffing component.
That is ICJE.
Pardon me?
That is ICJE.
Yeah. And so I'm saying, why will we need to have a separate funding that would be a Superior Court classification, as opposed to having sufficient staffing to cover also within ICJE that need?
Okay, apparently I didn't make myself clear.
Okay.
We don't.
Okay.
This is a contingency. If the General Assembly follows through on the fiscal note that was in the budget last year that said ICJE has to be self-funding,
yes, sir,
that means that money would be gone. And what we're saying is, if you're not going to fund ICJE through the Judicial Council budget, we would like to have money placed in our budget so we could conduct our own in-house training program. PAC, for example, does their own. In fact, we, through their good graces, met with them and developed the request based on, they have 4 people in their training program. We don't have as many people as they do. We thought we could do it with 2 people.
Okay.
And again, it's contingent upon you not funding ICJE. If you're going to fully fund ICJE, you can withdraw that budget request.
Well, to that point, I'm looking at the request that came through Judicial Council. It was for $1,164,992 through the governor, and what is being recommended in House committee is the same sum. So we haven't reduced it. So would that answer that question?
Yes, if you fully funded ICJE, you could withdraw that request from us.
For a little bit of history, last year we funded ICJE. The Senate wanted to take it out, and I think the compromise in the budget was that we put that fiscal note about being self-supporting, but it did not impact you last year.
No, sir.
And I think our intention is we're going to do the same thing this year, which is ICJE, and your budget request is a fallback in case the Senate sticks to their position from last year. But our intention is to go with ICJE.
Good.
That's correct, Chairman Powell.
Good. That clears that up.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
Have you mentioned at all about the request? I think there was a request for 6 new judges.
No, that was not part of this budget request, but there were.
I will say, just as chair of my committee, I'm waiting to get some word from the governor's office on that point, because we've got a bill pending that I'm going to try to use the vehicle once the governor says we'll create X number and then come forward with it.
To answer Chairman Powell's question, there's a House bill dealing with Piedmont Circuit.
Right.
There's a Senate bill dealing with Bell-Forsyth. I have information that the Middle Circuit, which is Swainsboro, that general area, is going to be added by amendment to the Senate bill. And Judge Stevens, the Western Circuit, Judge Stevens assures me that he will find some legislator that likes him well enough to include the Western Circuit somewhere.
Well,
He better
we
find.
think there's going to be three. I'm suggesting that my understanding may be wrong, but I think there's going to be three, and it may be starting out 2 with July and 1 in January, which we do sometimes as staggering it.
The top three, Bell-Forsyth was first from a Judicial Council recommendation, Piedmont was second, and the Middle Circuit was third.
Well, he may find somebody to drop a bill, but he better find him a friend on appropriations. The senior judge funding, did you talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question.
I don't think we haven't discussed that
Okay.
Where is that one?
That is 934 in the little blue block below
Right.
that. Yeah, it's not on yours, Judge, but it's on
Okay.
ours. Currently, we have $681,000 in the budget for regular senior judges. We added another $300,000 for senior judges in circuits with accountability courts. And if you will recall, we talked when we did the accountability courts hearing a couple of weeks ago about making another pot of money for circuits that may be able to put in an accountability court, but for whatever reason their judges might not be interested in doing that, and setting up a third pot of money for senior judges who have an interest in accountability courts so that they could help set up accountability courts in those circuits that would otherwise qualify other than the fact that the judges are not interested in that. If you could comment on that for a minute.
Our preference would be, rather than having these three separate pots, is to have an allocation for senior judges and let us be able to put them where they're needed. One thing, and this is just for informational purpose for this committee, of the 75 senior judges in the state, there are a total of 18 that are under the age of 70. There are only 18 under the age of 70.
So what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it, but if you're talking about developing a system with some long-range potential and special expertise, you're talking about a pool of judges that may not be doing it very long, or in some cases, judges who've been away from the active bench for some period of time. I mean, there's not as big a pool of folks out there as a lot of folks think there are. That are actually, because a lot of senior judges, they've got senior judge status, but if you call them, they're really not interested in doing anything right then. So there are not as many out there as you might think. And two, there's some judges that run accountability courts that really don't want anybody else tinkering in their court. They want to be sure it runs the way they intended that it operate.
Well, I understand that, but that second pot of money is to take over that judge's regular caseload so that he can do the accountability courts. The third pot is to put a senior judge who has an interest in accountability courts in a circuit where the sitting judges do not have that interest and do not want to do that. They want to run their regular caseload. So it's sort of a flip side of what that second pot of money is for.
It's hard to comment on that because you're talking about a scenario that just never has been tried before. That very well may work. But it's hard for me to give you a specific answer to something that I just don't really have any experience with yet.
And it very well may be a pilot project, but it got good feedback from the accountability court judges.
One other thing, if you look at the numbers that you may see, is the money that was appropriated specifically for senior judge usage for drug courts. It seems, if you at first blush, will appear to be underutilized. Part of that reason is originally it talked in terms of that funding being available January 1, and so people have not really tapped into that. They were really using the other existing senior judge money. So I don't think you can look at that usage and get a fair read on it right now. I think over time we'll develop that. But right now, again, we've used a lot of senior judge money from the more traditional pot to fund usage in drug court scenarios rather than money that was unique to that particular purpose.
Chairman Neal.
Yes, sir.
Wave.
He
Okay.
went on to take care of me.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Powell.
So is this the last one? Ron's not here yet, from the governor's office. So we'll do. All right, we'll do prosecuting attorney's counsel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
I believe I'll let Michael, our budget director, start into our budget.
Mr. Chairman, if you want us to, we'll just go through item by item, and if you have questions, we'll just stop there.
Let's only go in for the stuff that's a change.
Okay. On the sheet I've got, it shows 8.2.1. It's in the district attorney's program. The first increase would be for the additional judgeships that were just mentioned. We went ahead and asked for all 6, so that way if there's less than 6, and obviously there'd be some savings there. Let's see, 8.2.2, it's a request for deferred promotions that were approved in FY09 and then withheld due to a budget shortfall. That amount would be $349,150.
All right, excuse me just a minute. That's 8.2.3 on our tracking sheet. And you're going to need to tell us what this is for.
Okay, to give you a little bit of background, as employee or ADA, I guess, out in the field is approved as they come in line for a step increase, the central office will let the district attorney know if they decide that they want to recommend that position for the increase. They would then bring that to the council and they would handle them in a slate. The council approved for this last slate. The funding was not there. So we've been advised to ask for this funding every time, and it has been in our budget every time since FY09, in hopes that if we do get it, we can go back and give it to those employees that are still with us. If we do not, then we'll probably be asking for it again, because like I said, that was the legal advice we've given is since we approved it and then never paid for it, we think we've got a liability.
All right, let me ask you a question on that. Those were approved, but they were never funded because we ran into the budget crisis.
That's correct.
All right. Since that date, I presume that there have been no more approved.
That's correct.
So this would not bring everybody back up. This is just for the ones who were approved but never funded.
That's correct.
All right. Now my second question is this. I presume that $349,150, that's not anything other than starting them from this date forward. It does not retroactive to 2009. Is that correct?
I don't know if I understand your question. Are you asking if that's retroactive, the $349,000?
July 1st, 2013, when that would begin. There would be nothing for prior time paid.
That's correct.
Okay. Then my third question is, of the people who were originally approved for that, how many are still assistant DAs?
103.
And so does this number reflect that number of assistant DAs, or is this the amount that was originally approved and it has not been culled out because of the attrition?
It's both. Even as we've had attrition, if we give this to somebody in their base pay with the benefits and stuff that go up, the attrition has not outpaced the amount that we would need to cover that on a yearly basis. So the amount actually has gone up a little bit for that 103, but it's around $20,000 or so that we would be short at this point.
All right, and then my final question is, you mentioned a couple of times about avoiding liability and that you've been advised to make this request to avoid liability. Is it my understanding that what you have been advised is whether or not we fund it, that by you making the request, you've avoided the liability?
We hope we have.
Okay. Any other questions on that topic? All right, move on.
Okay. The next item is increased funds to reinstate all state-funded victim advocates. And this request was, when we submitted this last year in the budget, you'll recall we had about a third of the ADAs that were fully funded to begin with. We had, I think that was 16. 2 of those were vacant, and this request would have been for, at the time that it was submitted, to help transition, I think it was 7 ADAs to move from state funding over to a different type of funding. At this point, when the money was removed last year, we now have no state-paid victim advocates on the payroll. We do still have a few in circuits that are being paid through other fund sources, grants and stuff like that. And so this would basically start us back in the direction of having state victim advocates.
All right, there are how many circuits?
49.
All right, of those 49 circuits, is there any circuit without a victim advocate?
At the state level, all are without a victim advocate.
That wasn't my question.
At the county level, no, they do have victim advocates.
Okay. And some of them have multiple victim advocates.
That's correct.
Of the 16 that were state paid out of the 49, and of course that was one reason why we focused on those, is why should the state pay for 16 victim advocates when we've got 49 circuits and evidently the other 33 circuits are functioning okay. Of the 16 victim advocates that we defunded, how many of those are still being employed, albeit not as state victim advocate paid positions?
I don't know that number. I'd have to get that, because that would be through a different, like a grant that comes through a county or something.
But none were terminated as a result of our defunding it, were they?
No, we did have some that were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, your next one.
Okay, increase funds to implement a promotional increase for ADAs, $1,394,534.
All right. This is 8.2.1 on our tracking sheet. All right, talk to us about that.
That would start currently with ADAs. It would basically start up the process that we had for people that are eligible for a step increase. It's nothing retroactive. It would just say, if this were funded, we'd start that process again.
Okay, this is sort of in tandem with the deferred promotions.
No.
Well, I mean, those were step increases that were approved but never funded.
That's correct.
And what you're saying is, regardless of what we do there, that the ADAs that before the budget crunch would have been normally eligible for step increases and now have been frozen for the last 3 years, that you're talking about taking them off the frozen and starting now, and tell us why.
Mr. Chairman, the chairman of our council wanted to, as probably a morale booster, as one instance of it, but also we've got people that our starting salaries is $42,500, and we've got ADAs that are now approaching 5 years in service at that salary level. As soon as the economy starts to turn around, we're going to lose a lot of folks. We were doing that before when the economy was good, and we think that that'll start up again once the economy turns around. So we want to get a fund increase and hopefully get some of these folks to stay with us when that does occur.
Tell the committee what you told me about the ADAs who are working at a county-paid position and then they transfer into an ADA position that's state-paid.
Are you referring to our...
The seniority as far as where they start.
Well, the county pays can be paid at any level. But when they come to the state system, we try to start them at the base salary. If they have a certain number of years and they come from a county position, by statute, they would land in our grid of salaries, depending on how many years they got. So they wouldn't start at the very beginning. They would get whatever appropriate salary they're supposed to get at that level.
Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have somebody that started off as an ADA, has 5 years experience, and still being paid at the 42 level, and somebody who was graduated from law school at the same time, employed at the same time, but in a county paid position, and then transfer to a state paid position, and they both have got the same level of experience, but one of them is being paid at a higher level.
Yes,
is that correct?
I was thinking of our spacer system, but you're absolutely correct. If they're in one circuit earning at the county level and then move to another circuit into a state paid position, they would actually get a pay raise at that point.
Okay. And this is to sort of bring some parity to that?
Yes, sir. It's trying to help us with that.
Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Anything else y'all need to talk to us about?
We've got a few requests in the PAC program as well.
Okay.
Okay, and I think the document I'm working off might be an older one here, but the item itself would be increase funds to expedite the deployment of the tracker system statewide.
All right, that's 834 on our tracking sheet.
Okay.
And tell us about that.
Sure. The issue we have with Tracker right now is we've got about 35 circuits, I believe, that are up and running. And when we initially started Tracker, you know, we've got 2 contractors and they're network type guys. They're the builders. As we've gotten more and more circuits online, we've realized that there's also a cost for keeping it up and going, and it's hampered us as far as getting more circuits on the system. So at this point, we've got some that are waiting to get on it and some that we've yet to even talk to about getting on it because we've got such a small amount of manpower that we can throw at it. And so what this would do would be provide us with more of a maintenance or help desk type that can come in and help us keep some of the issues going, and it'll be a lot lower of a cost than paying some of the contractors that we've got that are more builders and network type IT folks.
Have you factored in that savings in this request?
What savings?
From not having to use contract.
No, it would still be, we would still need those programmers to bring on some of the other circuits, but I guess, and maybe I misstated that, the point is we need the programmers programming, not necessarily worried about the maintenance of some.
So that's what's slowing down the
exactly
implementation.
And this and it's not really spelled out in here, but this would be more for the maintenance side, that we need more help with that so that we can get the higher paid people back to doing what we're paying them to do, which would be bring circuits online.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add, the tracker program being installed in, for instance, the Augusta circuit with 3 counties, and they have multiple other systems that Tracker would tie to. That's why we need the programmers working on that kind of stuff. It's going to take them I've been told 5 months to a year to deploy Tracker in that one circuit itself, just so that it can fit in all the other systems that are there in that circuit. So that's why we need them working on that and not doing the routine stuff.
Okay. Talk to us about the rent reduction, and then we'll move on.
The reduction in rent last year, we were asked to reduce both in size and in square footage cost. We have reduced. We currently have a warm body in each of the offices we have. We're over at the State Bar Building right now. We went from $20.10 a square foot to $14.30 a square foot. In last year's budget, we also were asked to reduce from the 20,000 square feet to around 15,000 square feet. we were doing that as we went. We thought we could pull it off. As we got farther into the year, we realized that for us to lose some of that square footage, we were going to have to build a wall. We were going to have to move some of the rooms and pay for all the moving the electrical stuff around. And the cost of that is actually greater than the cost to just keep the square footage. And so we've asked for the committee to fund that if they will.
And we did that in the 12 supplemental, did we not?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Judicial Council. On this. Okay. Excuse me. Welcome. We're going to talk primarily, unless you've got some other issues, about accountability courts and the case management system portion of your budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we need to talk about?
No, not if you're approving everything else we've got in there. We're fine.
I didn't say that.
But if there are any questions, otherwise, we'll be glad to answer them. I'm Marla Moore. I have with me Mark Williams from my office today to talk to you. And my understanding is that you wanted to hear about accountability courts from us. On Wednesday,
Let's talk about case management first, and then we can go. Then we can do the rest of our time on accountability courts.
Sure. As you know, the Administrative Office of the Courts
This is 6.4.1 on everybody's tracking sheet.
is created legislatively in 15.522 to serve as the staff of the Judicial Council. Under that charge, we are to consult with and assist judges in relating to court administration and provide services. We are to examine the administrative and business methods and systems employed in the courts and make recommendations for necessary improvement. We compiled statistical and financial data and other information on the judicial work of the courts. And we examine the state of the dockets, practices, and procedures of the courts. And we formulate and submit recommendations to you and the governor concerning the improvement of the judicial system. One of the areas that we have worked in all these years is working with the courts and working as they have developed case processing systems to pull out management information system from those. What we know at this point in time is as our accountability courts, our problem-solving courts have grown. Some of them have gotten a case management system. Some of them, their case management system is very manual, an Excel spreadsheet. Otherwise, information that comes to us in a variety of ways. We are seeking to bring uniformity to that, and to that end, we have worked with one of the vendors who is taking roughly 1/3 of the courts that are in existence already, taking that vendor that they are using and expanding that to all the courts and requiring all the courts that are coming on to use that case management system. This will allow us to be very uniform in the information that we require the courts to give to us. It will allow us to provide information to you all that we spend a lot of time right now manually putting together. And that is the...
This is not just for accountability courts?
This particular request is for accountability courts. We have worked in a variety of ways in order to pull information from the disparate systems that are out there in the judicial circuits now. But what happens with your problem-solving courts in most cases is that once that case is filed and gone through the system to a certain point, if it is diverted into a problem-solving or accountability court, then those case processing systems don't keep track of what's going on, what are the events, and how the various requirements that are there, standards and all that, are being kept. They're not part of that same system. So what we are asking for is the funding in order to allow those courts to have one system that will basically report. Our reporting should be a byproduct of what helps make them able to manage their caseloads better in those courts.
But if they wouldn't have two case management systems, then those accountability court circuits would have one that's got enhanced capability.
Right. This would be, yes. With an accountability court, you have generally a coordinator and other staff. This is the program that they would use.
All right. I guess my question is that if this is suitable for a court that has an accountability add-on, then I presume that it could be adapted for all courts.
I don't believe that what you would want to do is take this system and adapt it to courts and their regular business, if that's what you're asking.
No, I think what my question is that from what I understood, that this does A, B, C, D, E, F because it's accountability so that you're seamless if somebody goes from one system to the other. Mm-hmm. But that F is the accountability portion of it, so why would not A, B, C, D, E, that you could put the same system everywhere in the state? It's just that some courts would not use the accountability function of it.
Well, there are in place right now a variety of systems. There are three main ones that are being used, and these are done not on a circuit-wide basis most times, although some of them are, but they're also done on a county basis, so that what happens in these is that we have those systems. If we were to go to those systems, and it would be very expensive and very costly to develop a component to handle accountability courts to go with each one of those systems, where in fact using a system that has been developed for accountability courts that will be a part of that whole process is we feel a more cost-effective way to handle these courts.
I don't think you're following my question, but we'll move on. The $400 and however many $1,000, that is for software, hardware, the whole 9 yards.
Yes.
Y'all have got
a breakdown of that, yes.
But you've got a request for proposal. This is a good, solid number.
Yes.
And we are not going to run into a situation where we think we're funding something and then next year we found out we only funded phase one.
We think that this will fund the existing courts and get us started on the new courts that we're hoping to come up with. This is the initial cost. We do anticipate that there will be maintenance costs and some costs as new courts come on. But however, we work this, I mean, this will be the highest year that we would have costs associated with that.
Does this have the whole 9 yards, the IT, the support staff, everything?
It includes that, yes. It includes what we would use.
Any other questions about the case management system? Seeing none? Sir?
Not knowing enough about it, this is the first time I've seen it. It is not a reoccurring full expense for some maintenance cost every year. We don't know what that's going to be.
Right.
Have you presented to you from?
Yeah, well, we have been working, as I said, with the company that is currently providing, that is currently being used in about a third of the programs. Now,
Third of the programs in the state?
Of the accountability courts.
Is there more than one type program, or are we just looking at one vendor?
We are primarily looking at one vendor. If, I mean, we are talking to others just to ensure that we are getting the best deal. There is some discussion about that vendor because right now some of the courts that have gone with it, if they use the drug lab, then they get certain parts of it. But we have also talked to them about enhancing this system in order to be sure that it gives the information that all of us need in order to do the assessments on these courts. So we're looking at a more robust system, and we're also looking at not requiring if a court already has an agreement or is looking at doesn't want to get the drug screening piece of this system, then that's where our costs and things are coming in. Sorry, I don't mean to be losing my voice here.
That's all I had.
Right. As you are well aware, there has been some discussion about where the new funding for accountability courts is going to be administered from. The governor's recommendation is that it be through CJCC. I understand that there have been some discussions regarding that as far as if that continues, that there would be some components of AOC that would remain in place that would support that, and that CJCC would basically be a funding mechanism, that they would not actually process the applications, that they would continue to be processed very much like they have been done in the past. And Ryan is here from the governor's office, and I think he's been involved in some of those discussions, and I would like him to sort of outline for the committee how that process would work, and then I would like for you, Marla, to talk to us a little bit about what the continuing function of AOC would be as far as that's concerned.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
I'm always happy to be here. I think where we've been at in discussions about how to administer the money that would go for accountability courts, I can speak for the governor's office. Marla can speak for the judicial side. That we'd sat down and mapped out a process whereby the money would go to CJCC as planned. That we would utilize a grant funding committee that the governor would appoint to and the Chief Justice would appoint to, that would decide where those funds go. That committee would be made up of a majority of judges, so that any concerns about the judges not having the proper input there would be dealt with. And when that committee reached its final line items, for lack of a better word, then the Judicial Council would bless that, have an up or down decision of whether that was permissible, and then the CJCC board would treat that the same way, couldn't tinker with the details of how it gets the line items, and those two bodies would approve, and the money would flow from there. That's the proposal that we've all discussed as far as everyone signing in blood. I don't know if we can say that, but that's where it's been at for a while.
Yeah, sure, Chairman Willie.
Envision the administration of that money, Ryan. Would it be administered? I understand your process is held by CJCC. A committee would have the oversight of determining its application of funds, and then the administration of the funds, I call it the oversight, distribution, operation of it. Where would that go?
I think one thing we learned in the process of seeing how, I think there's currently an AOC grant subcommittee, I think you call it, right, for accountability courts. that is in existence now. It has staff that supports it. I think what the idea was to utilize that same staff to support that, the combo committee, for lack of a better word, and if that needs to be funded separately, that can be. We really discussed that. We leave that to y'all.
Okay.
But that was generally the approach. I'm sure there'll be some input at a staff level from CJCC, but I mean, the idea being that
So you'd have
the
one
AOC,
agency. In other
the
words,
same people who've been looking
would
at
be
it.
creating another agency to do the same redundancy. I keep using the term that we already got in place.
No, absolutely not.
Marla?
Well, maybe it'd be helpful, Marla, if you could give us sort of an idea of how the process is working now. Because the concern I think that we've got, and I think the governor's office shares, is that there are certain things that AOC is doing and doing well that y'all have implemented over the years. And we certainly don't want to start a new group out trying to reinvent the wheel when we've already got a process in place. And I think that the proposal is intended to do that. The concern that I have is that we don't add there maybe 3 tracks that it's going through now. It's going through the Accountability Courts Grant Committee, and then it may be going through the Funding Committee, and then it may be going through Judicial Council. So that's 3 groups. And if this involves 5 groups, or it has to go to 2 groups twice, or something like that, we need to make sure that it's as streamlined as possible, and that we continue to use some of the same processes. So if you would tell us how we're doing it now, and then maybe we can just have a little quick discussion about maybe how to accommodate what the governor wants to do, but at the same time not make it too cumbersome.
Well, yes, we do have in the Judicial Council a committee, which is called the Judicial Council Accountability Courts Committee, and it is charged with developing standards and overseeing that those standards are met, and it's also charged with making recommendations to the Judicial Council as to funding and how the funding should be
of
used,
the courts.
of the courts themselves. And what happens is that when we have the appropriation, then the funding subcommittee, which they have developed within that committee, develops any, looks at, what's going on in those courts. They have, over time, developed a very robust grant application proposal, which asks for a lot of information. That committee, which is made up of judges and is staffed by the AOC, looks at those and then makes recommendations on how the funding is to be split up between those courts.
To whom do they make the recommendation?
They make that. It goes to the full committee. They discuss it, and they make recommendation to the Judicial Council.
Okay.
And that's how it's funded.
All right. The subcommittee accepts grant applications from courts, and they evaluate those and sees which ones are meritorious and which ones are not, and then of the ones that are deemed meritorious, then they decide how the available money is to be split.
Yes.
And then they make their recommendation to the full committee.
Yes.
And the full committee not only looks at those recommendations, but they also do the standards.
Yes.
Okay. And then the full committee makes its recommendations to the
Judicial Council.
Judicial Council, and then Judicial Council approves, and then AOC writes a check.
Right.
Okay. All right. Understand.
Well, we get reports and then we write checks.
Okay. Ryan, now that we sort of, maybe we got the cart before the horse, to find out what we're doing now, tell me what is grafted onto this process, or what's substituted in this process.
What's substituted in this process would be we'd have a new committee that I think, as we discussed, as I said, we talked about this at length. We've never finalized anything, so I can't speak for Marla here that it's final, but it's where we were comfortable, I can tell you that, we being the governor, that we would have a 9-person committee The governor would appoint 5 people, the Chief Justice 4, the governor would agree to appoint 2 judges of his 5, and thinking being that the other 3 would come from the executive branch, where there's agencies that provide the backup services that are involved in a drug court, since a drug court is not typically a totally judicial function. It's part of a service provided for people to help them stay out of jail. That somebody from corrections, somebody from behavioral health, and somewhere maybe somewhere else in the state government, the government would choose, and that committee would make up the grant decision-making committee. And whether or not there continues to exist another AOC funding committee in that structure would remain to be seen. As it doesn't bother us, but that would be separate from that existing committee. And so this new committee we thought of would be more of a combination, collaborative approach between CJCC and the AOC.
Let me ask you a question, and
Judicial Council. It all is the same thing.
they might take issue with that. Let me ask you this: knowing that the subcommittee reviews grant applications and then makes a recommendation to the full committee, and the full committee not only deals with grant applications but also deals with the standards, and then at that point it goes to the Judicial Council. Would it not make more sense to make this 9-person committee in place of the Judicial Council and let the application process go the same way that it has been? Because it still gives an up or down or approval or disapproval or whatever, but let the people who've been processing the applications continue to process the applications.
So
I'm talking about the 9-person committee, so that you don't have an extra couple of layers, is just to substitute them for, in the old process, what the Judicial Council did.
Well, if I'm hearing you right, sticking with the same process that exists now, but substituting the existing grant subcommittee with the committee we're talking about. With
The Judicial Council approval group for the new approval group, so the Judicial Council wouldn't have a function in this. That would just be that accountability courts committee and subcommittee, and then the new group.
I'm confused.
Well, currently what happens is the subcommittee, and then the committee, and then Judicial Council. My suggestion is subcommittee, full committee, new committee.
May I ask, or the committees that are in place now are Judicial Council committees,
They can still appoint that committee.
but not report to the Judicial Council? Is that what you're saying?
They can report to whomever they want to. I'm saying the final up or down approval would not be Judicial Council. It would be the 9-person committee.
And then have the existing subcommittees report up to that 9-person committee.
Yeah.
I can't speak for the governor, but I don't think that would be pose. I can't see how that poses a significant problem.
Because it seems to me like the work now and the process now is through the committee and the subcommittee. And to throw those out and substitute something else in basically is reinventing the wheel for something that works. And if the money is parked in CJCC and the final approval process is through this 9-person committee that substitutes for Judicial Council, I'm not saying that that's the way it ought to be, but to me it doesn't act under that scenario. You are not having another layer of government on top of whatever's there. You're just substituting one for the other. Chairman Willard.
Up to that, I'm trying to visualize too. We've already had a $2 million annual appropriation, which is being used for drug courts throughout the state. Are we going to have that $2 million administered one way, and the new money, and it's all going to be done through the same processes that we have agreed to? Okay.
And of course that's up to the committee. That's not part of the governor's recommendation, but it seems to me, as far as good government.
Has never been said. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
It does not make sense to have two groups doing
Sure
the
doesn't.
same thing. And so the current
One not knowing what the other's doing.
currently there's 2.2 million that is in the accountability courts.
And that's going to be now with additional 10 million, or is 10 million going to be the
Well,
total?
I mean, my recommendation to the committee is, if we follow what the governor has requested, is that we move the portion that's being granted out to CJCC, and that the portion that's being used by AOC for administration services to staff the committee be left in there. So you would basically move 1.7 million and leave $500,000.
And moving it means what? To have it become a part of the 10 million?
It would then become 11.7.
11.7 million, okay.
Did you follow that? Okay. Any other questions? All right, Marla, you had some comments. Not happy comments, but happy comments nonetheless.
No, I think that I need to report that the Judicial Council met by teleconference last Wednesday and confirmed its desire that funding for the courts be in the judicial branch, and that they have given the Chief Justice, as the chair of the council, their support in continuing to try to work this effort out. Now, having said that, however the funding comes, and we are very pleased that there is funding being talked about for these courts. I think if you look at our 19-year history and working with the judges on building up these courts, you will know that we are very excited that there's more funding to come. But I think that it also comes with a requirement that we be as vigilant as possible, that our courts be performing in the way that we expect them to, and that requires giving them the support that they need. And one of the things that has happened at the Administrative Office of the Courts over the last 3 or 4 years, like every other agency, is that we have suffered cuts. And one of the areas that has suffered from that has been our accountability courts and grants area. So what we had requested, which I think has been before you, is that the positions that we currently have that are doing really double duty in accountability courts and in grants administration, is that we be able to make those 3 positions that we have now be completely working in the area of accountability courts, and that we be able to add 2 compliance monitors that can go out and work with these courts. We have also looked at what training requirements would be. I'm proud to say that Georgia is one of the first states that requires our new courts, when they are going to be coming online, that they have to send a team to training. What we are looking at is being able to bring training to Georgia. In the past, because these have been done on scholarship, we've had limited numbers that we could ever send, and it would limit the number of new courts that we could bring online. So being able to bring that training to Georgia, I think, would be very helpful and get us a huge step forward in getting those teams up and ready to go. So we have put in there an amount that would be for training. We also have in our existing courts a, how shall I say, different courts are different. They all could, I think, and would agree that they could stand a tune-up in order to be able to come to advanced training, which they've not been able to do. We do also a yearly conference, which is where the only place that I know where all of those different problem-solving courts and their teams can come together and get a good education training experience. And we do that as I said, once a year. So we have put that into our funding as well, funding request. I think that pretty much outlines what we have put in there. I think our personnel request, if you will see, includes not only the 5 positions that I talked to you about, also includes some amount in there for staff travel, supplies, and materials, and just the ordinary things. Our training amount that we have in there, I will tell you, was based on 20 jurisdictions receiving week-long training. We anticipate now, with the funding that might be available, that there, and also with just the physical ability to bring new courts on, that amount would be closer to 10 in the next year. And we also have been able to refine further with the National Drug Court Institute is the one that we would be bringing in, that training would be about $175,000. I think we had originally put in $280,000 because our original estimate from them was $28,000 per circuit. So we would decrease that amount. Our annual conference, we have asked for $140,000. That would still require us to charge the participants to attend. If we were to fund that totally, it would be somewhere around $300,000. But we do charge a registration fee for those that are attending. The operational tune-up that I talked about, we are estimating that 34 courts participating in a 2-day training at $12,500 each would come to about $425,000.
Have you given all these numbers to Kendra? Okay.
She has them all, sir.
All right. Any questions? Thank you all very much. Does that complete our agencies? We are adjourned.